Hi, welcome, folks. My name is Melanie Demayer. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm the director of the Women's Resource Center and assistant dean of students here at Georgia Tech. We're going to give folks a few minutes to trickle in, and then we will get started. Okay, so we'll get started now. Again, my name's Melanie Demayer. Welcome to our final program for Context this academic year. We're extremely excited to welcome our partners from the Partnership for Southern Equity to learn more about their work and to just learn together today in this space. I want to share with folks a little bit about what context is and um, how it has come to be. So it's a collaboration between the Office of Student Diversity Programs, the LGBTQIA Resource Center, the Veterans Resource Center, and the Women's Resource Center, and the Division of Student Life. Um, Together, we collaborate on this program focused on interdisciplinary work that explores social justice themes and issues through the lens of race and class in Atlanta. It's our hope that context allows us to provide a platform for inclusive conversation about the challenges of social justice across the different issues that shape our communities and lives. This year, context themes have been through the lens of maps, where we are trying to explore a wide range of topics related to how mapping and how we use those maps, both figuratively and literally, have an impact on the ways we experience our world. And you, I hope, have followed us on social media if you haven't, but we're hoping to spark conversation there and provide additional resources and information for further learning and engagement, as well as these kind of highlighted and spotlighted programs that we've done each month. If you'd like to find out more about context, we'll drop information into the chat that takes you to recordings and information from each of the months that we have done throughout this year. Um, and with that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping here and logistics work. If you have questions, make sure you drop them in to the Q&A, and our partners and presenters from Partnership for Southern Equity will be happy to answer them. And if you have comments, please feel free to use that comment and chat box so they can see it and they know what you're having to say. With that, I'll turn it over to y'all.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. We're really excited to be able to offer this space. Really the first of its kind youth collaborative presentation at PSE. So again, really excited to be here and thank you again for having us. I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves. My name is Blythe. I'm a Just Energy Coordinator at PSE. I use she, her pronouns, and I will give it over to whoever else wants to go next.
I guess we can go in order. I'll go next. My name is Jabari Brooks. I'm currently a senior at UNC Charlotte. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I work for Yes for Equity as a youth team lead.
Hey everyone, I'm Rachel. I'm also a Yes for Equity youth staff at PSE, and I am a junior in high school.
I'll go. Hey guys, my name is Nike. I'm a graduating senior at Spelman College. I am a youth ambassador for Partnership for Student Equity, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, my name's Anna. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a fellow in the Just Growth team at PSE.
Thank you all, and we got contributions from Brittany, Michael, and Sydney. It was truly a collaborative event, so we thank everyone for contributions and for speaking today. So moving on to objectives, we hope folks will come out of this with understanding our organizing approach and the key factors that inform our work, and then ultimately be able to use this approach in their own lives, organizing work, and to inform their everyday decisions, understanding of the South. So you can see we do most of our work in these 4 key portfolio areas: just energy, just growth, just opportunity, and just health. So what distinguishes us from other organizations and missions is that we name race and we base our work in racial equity. I'll let Jabari take it away here.
Hello. Like we said before, this is the first collaboration between kind of youth and PSE in this type of format. Thanks to PSE, Yes for Equity has been, I will say, resurrective. We were formerly known as Youth Empower Solutions, and through PSE, we've been able to be much more explicit when we talk about racial equity and things of that sort, and what Yes for Equity is about. As you can see right here, the 2020 census revealed that a majority of Americans under the age of 18 are people of color. And that's kind of intersectionality between youth power and racial equity that PSE and Yes for Equity are trying to bridge. And through Yes for Equity, we're very explicit on bringing youth into these spaces. Since youth are systematically excluded from a lot of these larger conversations when they're also victims of things such as police brutality and environmental racism, we just don't see that as right, even though they are still experiencing these same things, but they do not have a voice. And we've seen recently with the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer that a lot of it was charged from the youth. So through Yes for Equity and PSE, we're trying to continue that work. So thank you. And also we have the official launch for Yes at 1 o'clock. And we'll remind you of that later. And you'll hear from me a little bit later as well. Thank you.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Jabari. So this takes us into really our terms conversation. So the delineation between equality and equity is really foundational to our work. So the graphic with the bikes really helps us visualize the distinction between the terms and also engages with the concept of ableism, which can be described as really an inherent aspect of equity itself. Equity also acknowledges the past harms and histories, especially when discussing systematic racism. It also gives us a path forward to right the wrongs for hopefully a more liberated future. So there's a lot of graphics out there discussing this. We decided to use these 2, and I think it's also really important to really drive home the point of ableism when talking about these terms. And I think the graphic on the right does so. But again, there's a lot of out there and just an important distinction to make. This brings us into our theory of change. With this understanding of equity, we can discuss our organizing strategy. So when discussing our organizing work, we like to use the term equity ecosystem. You might see that in our websites and other published works that we have. You see this in practice when we see community being given the opportunity to join our Just Energy Academy, become partner at Just Energy Circle, prioritizing grassroots organizing work, and how we continually engage folks in our trainings, programs, and even joining the PSE staff. As we see, we actually just hired our manager who is a Just Energy Academy participant before. So really that kind of shows that we're trying to continually engage folks in PSE and continue to loop them into our work and organizing practices. It's also important to note that we also prioritize community-based and sourced knowledge that really meet the demands of community and what community brings as priorities in their lives. So this brings us to values-based organizing, which is where our standpoint is coming from. The importance we place also in relationship building within our networks and the diverse array of relationships that we have, as you can see with schools, faith institutions, government. This is really foundational to our work, and we would not be here without the kind of relationship building and network building that we have. So what makes this approach different is that we intentionally lead with the direct language of racial equity first in all of our work. We also see the need to make this part of our legacy and intergenerational capacity building ultimately, which is why the process of engaging youth in this way is so important. It's also been a key tactic in the civil rights movement. This is not new at all. Youth has been foundational to the work since before, and definitely before this moment. So we're really just trying to continue the legacy and keep it strong. I'll give it over to Jabari.
Hello again. I just kind of want to open up my section with kind of a question, just kind of gauge where everybody is. I just want to ask, what word comes to mind when you think about environmental racism?
And people, again, are putting this in the chat, and we'll look over them, and Jabari will help kind of facilitate that process.
Thank you, Rachel and Ike, for another racism. Yes, I definitely feel that. Um,
There's kind of a slight delay, so we'll give folks a couple seconds to write in their response, and then we'll continue on.
yep. Thank you, Blythe.
Absolutely. And again, feel free to. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jabari.
Oh, I just want to say thank you, Camilla, for supporting with the youth being the foundation of social justice work movement.
And feel free to keep posting in the chat as we go along if something stands out to you. And also we'll collect these at the very end too for our Q&A section.
Yep, what Blythe said. So I'm gonna wait a little bit longer so people delay so people can come through with what they think about environmental racism. Camilla said hazardous waste material dump sites being placed in close proximity to communities of color. We're gonna talk about that as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Disproportional and inequitable risk. I feel like I really feel like that's the easiest way to put it. Disproportional and inequitable is the easy way to say that, and we're going to get more in depth of that as well. I'm gonna let a couple more people come through. Then we actually have a video on environmental racism that's around 2 minutes long to kind of give more of an overview, and it kind of gives examples that people are pretty familiar with, so to give kind of deeper in understanding.
Awesome.
The ignorance of indigenous methods of action to combat environmental issues. Yes, it's a lot of things that indigenous people did to combat these things that when this land was taken and colonized that they just ignored. And also, indigenous people are also pushed to the side and marginalized when it comes to these things, because a lot of times, as we can see, I don't remember the exact name of the pipeline, that they were protesting, and it ended up doing exactly what they said it would, ended up leaking and destroying the environment. Can you say that one more time, Blake?
Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah, the Keystone Pipeline. So, um, since this area of America was colonized, these indigenous people have been able to deal with these things, and they're still dealing with it. And I feel like that's a very important that we acknowledge it. Um, Cities allowing dirty industry to build right next to black neighborhoods. Yep, without anybody batting an eyelash. So that's a problem as well. So we're kind of going to get into that. We can go ahead and go to the video, and this kind of talks about it as well. We know how blue jeans is when you show video a little off, so please bear with us. We try to choose a video that didn't have too many moving images and stuff like that. So yeah, the audio should be fine though. So let's go.
When we think of racial injustice, police brutality, or what about our air and water? Environmental racism. It's about policies and practices that discriminate against communities of color by making them live near landfills, sewage plants, and other polluting facilities. And while poverty has a lot to do with it, the leading environmental justice expert told me this.
Racism trumps class. Even middle-income African Americans are more likely to live in more polluted neighborhoods.
In fact, one study found that Black Americans making $50,000 to $60,000 a year are more likely to live in polluted neighborhoods than white Americans who make just $10,000 a year. Flint, Michigan is a textbook case of environmental racism. It's where 100,000 residents have been poisoned with toxic water contaminated by high levels of lead. Why? Because the state was trying to save a buck. Flint is around 57% Black, with 40% of its population living in poverty. Residents protested the dirty water for over a year, but were ignored. And that's how environmental racism plays out. Minority communities have much less political clout, so regulators can and often do ignore them. And not far from Flint is Detroit, where 83% of the population is Black. It's home to the most polluted zip code in Michigan.
Zip code is the most powerful predictor of health. And all communities and all zip codes are not created equal.
Southwest Detroit is surrounded by a lot of industry like salt mining, steel production, tar sands oil refining, and coal burning. And that's meant that 1.6 million pounds of chemicals enter that community yearly. Not coincidentally, Wayne County, where Detroit is, has the highest number of children's asthma cases in the state. But look, environmental racism isn't just a Michigan story. It's an American story. Take, for example, Louisiana's Cancer Alley, an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River. It's known for its over 200 petrochemical plants and a high rate of cancer, mainly among Black residents. So is there anyone protecting folks from environmental racism? Well, there's supposed to be. The Environmental Protection Agency has a special department called the Office of Civil Rights. But in its 22-year history, the office has never formally found a single case of discrimination. In fact, more than 90% of communities that make complaints find them rejected or dismissed. On top of that, The Guardian newspaper recently revealed that U.S. authorities across the country are deliberately distorting water tests in cities like Detroit and Philadelphia to minimize the reported amount of lead in the water. Environmental racism, while not always the most visible form, is also widespread. So when is enough enough?
So we kind of wanted to share that video to kind of give an overview of how environmental racism is not only embedded in these cities, it's a government issue as well. And one of our co-collaborators wanted to make sure that I mentioned that the government is actually trying to co-opt this movement by saying environmental equity instead of environmental justice. What we are not looking for is environmental equity. We're looking for environmental justice. This problem should be eradicated, not distributed. And the fact that they are trying to co-opt it is something that we've seen in the past, and we'll discuss that some more. But I just want to discuss how environmental justice is the response to environmental racism and how it's been a systemic problem with people of color since the founding. Um, so could we go ahead to the environmental racism timeline? I'll kind of get more in depth into that. I'm sure a lot of us have seen this image before. I know growing up, I had this picture in my house. I didn't know where it was from. I knew it had something to do with MLK, but I didn't know how deeply embedded it had to do with environmental justice. This was one of the first strikes kind of going against environmental justice. It happened in Memphis in 1968, where two sanitation workers were actually tragically died on the job. And MLK got involved and actually helped these workers with this I Am a Man strike to kind of get better wages, better conditions. And this is kind of recognized as kind of the beginning of a national movement of trying to get environmental justice for all. So in 1983, quite a long time later, the United States Government Accountability Office conducted a study where they talked about in that city that 3 out of the 4 abandoned toxic waste sites were near high populations of African Americans, which is a problem of itself. But what we see very, very often with the government is things that the community of color been knew, but they do not care until there's cold hard evidence, statistics and stuff like that, which is really a slap in the face because kind of like with police brutality, we've been saying this for years, but now that's been recorded and it's not ignorable because it's on the 7 o'clock news every night. Now there wants to be a large movement for it. And also after that, in 1987, this was more of a wide-scale study where they found millions of Pacific Islanders and other people of color were living near hazardous waste facilities, either abandoned or uncontrolled and stuff like that. And also, this whole timeline is a slap in the face because y'all want to know where I got this from? The EPA website. The same EPA with the Civil Rights Division that has not been taking these claims serious. And it's even a bigger problem because all I can think of is what the EPA is doing. Y'all remember during the summer, that picture still haunts my mind when the U.S. senators and House of Representatives were kneeling with kente cloth all over them and then proceeded to do next to nothing. This is kind of this is when I see this on the EPA website, I see the same thing. You are seeing a lot more abundance of them talking about, for example, environmental racism, but still operating in the same ways and same systems that's actively hurting people of color, which angers me on a daily basis because it's like, hey, we notice the problem. We don't really care though, because you can't really do much about it. That's kind of what I get from a lot of this. So we just kind of wanted to go over kind of like an overview of kind of how it started with environmental racism and environmental justice and stuff like that. And then we're going to go and kind of dive into how we can help the Georgia and specifically around the Atlanta area in combating these things in your own community. So we're going to talk about some indicators and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jabari. So today we'll be discussing the following indicators as examples of the work we engage with as an organization and in our youth capacity building work now with integration of YES. We understand foundationally that these indicators are inherently intersectional. Marginalized communities do not have the privilege and never have of separating issues. It's a compounded effect over time of how it integrates into systems of oppression that we're working against ultimately. So before we dive in, we're going to give some better context to these indicators. And so I wanted to start off discussing energy burden, which is a cornerstone issue to organization and the portfolio area that I'm also coming from today. So energy burden is literally defined as how much of your income goes into energy and utility expenses. So as we know from Jabari's slides and the video that he shared, Black people and minorities are more likely to experience environmental injustice and intentional harm, especially in the placement of power and generation plants and gas lines you kind of got to. It's really the systematic effect of racial injustice that doesn't allow low-income people of color, especially, to fully engage with legal bodies who make these decisions on where to place the power plants and gas lines, the timeline for doing so, and also what kind of generation they produce. So we've seen, especially with the recent light being shined on the blatant voter suppression tactics being used in our state most recently. So as we can see in this ACEEE graph, Atlanta is one of the most burdened cities in the South by far. We also know from the data that 36% of Black households, 35% of Hispanic households in Atlanta in the metropolitan area are experiencing high energy burden above 6% and sometimes as high as 16%, which is also much higher than the median household in the nation. So from this data, we know these communities would benefit from comprehensive energy efficiency programming. However, making these changes to these programs more accessible requires policy change, as we also got at the state and local levels. It also requires authentic utility, it requires utility stakeholder authentic participation as well, which we have not really seen stand the test of time. So it requires systematic change and also, again, requires the government to be being fully engaged. So even though we've seen more people than ever actually turn out at the Public Service Commission election this year, we still need to, and also to, elect a new person that's not grandfathered into the system, we still have not engaged enough folks. So, and it's really important to engage more people and also low-income people of color because we're combating a legacy system that's never been in minority people's favors. So with this slide, we're zooming out and we still see a South disproportionately burdened. In this map, we see how the warmest states in the South with the highest energy burden already will likely and are experiencing the effects of climate change first. As the nation faces an average 0.7-degree loss in gross domestic product per year nationally, the South will actually experience a 10 to 20% loss if temperatures continue to rise, as they have and likely will. This has serious implications for utility costs rising to accommodate grid overbuilding, which would displace costs and labor burdens, again, on low-income people of color, and namely Black people first, especially in the South. So this is an important economic point, layered to the fact that the ACEEE found that even though Southern Black families may sometimes pay less overall energy bills, not really in relation to their income, they definitely pay more per square foot of their home, which indicates the relative inefficiency of their homes. So we know that a lot of low-income houses in Atlanta and the Southwest, Atlanta specifically, where historically a lot of Black residents have been pushed to over time from central Atlanta and other parts of Atlanta, shows a correlation again in the energy burden, race, and also interlaid with gentrification efforts, especially when considering too that most of these communities cannot afford advanced retrofitting and energy efficiency programming, which sometimes can be very expensive. So in general, this layered issue can also be mapped in other predominantly Black areas, kind of brought in with the video, where displacement has been high, including Detroit, Michigan, and also Columbia, South Carolina, to name another place. We also know that most people living near Superfund sites, incineration sites, and generation sites are also low-income people of color. These sites are also intentionally located in rural outer city areas where its communities are being pushed to, so pretty much where they can afford, which is not in the middle of the city. So the way we produce energy, where, and the compounding effects of climate change really have serious racial implications that we really cannot ignore. And I think it's also important to bring up that low-income Black communities and Southern communities disproportionately have to also rely on payday loans and predatory lenders, sometimes even cover the basic expenses of energy bills, and even choose which bills they have to pay, sometimes deciding between paying an energy bill or paying a medical bill, which no one should have to face that struggle at all. So it's a really important point when connecting the history of the national wealth gap to energy burden as well. So I wanted to quickly pull us back to gentrification. So this is a map brought to us by the Urban Displacement Project. So this map helps us visualize the point I made earlier about the connection between Black community displacement by continuing gentrification efforts. We also see the distinction in Black and white community using the dividing line of Highway I-20. Also has implications for air quality as well, which we'll go into later. So layered with this, the fact that Black homes in South DeKalb and South Fulton are also worth way less than their white counterparts. So in Atlanta, less than a quarter of homes are actually Black owned, yet Black people make up the majority of the city. So there's really a disconnect there. So we'll go more in depth with this in the next slide. I'll let Naike take it over.
All right, hey y'all. So remember the video we watched at the beginning that said zip code is the most powerful indicator of health? Well, it's also a powerful indicator of wealth, and I'm about to tell you why. So people living just a few blocks apart from you may have vastly different opportunities as it depends on your income. And that's where redlining comes in. So what is the history behind this? History, the difference between equity and equality. So explicit segregation, here's a quote I'll read for you. If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it's necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. A change in social or racial occupancy generally contributes to instability and a decline in values. Move on. Okay, so what's happening in the South? So in Georgia, where I currently am, if your family was denied a mortgage in the 1930s or the 1950s or the 1970s, then you may have not had the family wealth or down payment to become a homeowner today. In that way, the consequences of past redlining transcend time. So what is redlining? Redlining is a discriminatory practice employed by banks mostly, but it can also be other institutions where investment in certain neighborhoods are denied to certain people of social classes and demographics of the inhabitants in that area. And you can still see that today because there are different practices. Although it was formally outlawed in 1968 by the Fair Housing Act, you can still see those discriminatory practices when individuals try to offer, for example, worse rates to inhabitants for certain houses. So they'll give the white person this rate, but the Black person a rate they can't afford, which when you think about it, doesn't make sense. So as we can see in this little picture, A is the areas in green where considered hot spots or good places to be. B is second grade, the areas in blue were deemed not as desirable, but still good places to live. C, the areas in yellow were considered to be declining, and D, the areas in red were considered to be in full decline. So as you can see, this practice hinders economic development in areas occupied mostly by ethnic minorities because it limits the flow of investment and it halts increases in the housing market. And due to this, these redline areas eventually become underdeveloped and the residents suffer to acquire wealth. And as we've seen, this is also an indicator of discrimination because what happens in most of these areas is because of the fact that they're becoming undeveloped, they often lack the basic services like banking, healthcare. They have fewer job opportunities and transportation options. And so continuing on with the topic of redlining in Georgia, if you look to the right, the dark green represents the Black population, which is basically everywhere, and the light green represents the white population. And if you'll look on the left, historic redlining, if you see in all the gray areas or where you see we have businesses, the best areas to live are the ones that are in dark blue. The ones that are still desirable, not the best, but you could still live there, they're in light blue. The ones that are definitely declining are in yellow, and you see the red are in hazardous places to live. So if you pay attention, we have a lot of yellow and we have a lot of red and we have a lot of light blue. But we want a lot of gray because we want businesses to be booming, and we want dark blue to be spread all over the map. And as you can see, it's only in a small region.
Awesome, thank you. Rachel, please feel free to take it away.
Hello. So I'm here to talk to y'all about food apartheid and food deserts, which are an environmental indicator, just basically things that you can look and see in your own communities that are indicators of this environmental racism being present in your specific area. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the gas stations, convenience stores, corner stores that we all see in our communities, by giving y'all some graphics, first of all. On the left, you see that picture with, some cars parked and trash everywhere. Trash that looks like it came from some kind of convenience store, things people were eating, drinking, and then they discarded it when they were walking somewhere else. And we ask how many of our neighborhoods look like this. Because personally, I know that my neighborhood, after being gentrified and ungentrified many times, and after the redlining, after the gerrymandering, it got a lot more convenience stores, and then the neighborhood started looking like this. Our corner started looking like this. And my father hates it. Is constantly going out and having to pick up trash from the yard, and complaining about how the neighborhood doesn't look like it respects itself, when that is a direct result of this environmental racism. In the same way that redlining disproportionately affects communities of color, specifically in the South, obesity and heart disease do as well. So if you look at this graphic on the right side, it's color-coded based on what's considered underweight, normal, and all the way up to extreme obesity. And those same colors correlate with the graphic on the bottom right, where the states themselves are color-coded. And you see out on the West Coast and up north, in more liberal, wealthy, higher income areas, obesity is a problem all over the country, but people have better, deal with this better than we do in the South. And you see there's some extremely deep, dark reds going on in the South, specifically in Georgia. And that's alarming. So we can continue on. Okay, so the litter in your neighborhoods is a result of those gas stations, those corner stores, and the fast foods lining the streets. These entities also contribute to lowered life expectancies and increased illness in marginalized communities, or in other words, food apartheid. Food apartheid is the practice of segregating healthy food. Marginalized communities get the Walmarts and the gas stations, while other communities get the farmers markets and grocery chains like Publix and Whole Foods. And like I was saying, as soon as, my father moved into this home a very, very long time ago when there were white people living here. I live in North Clayton County, Georgia. So at one point, North Clayton High was an all-white school. And this was a white community. And then Black people moved in, Asian people moved in. It was a primarily white, Asian, and Black community. And then it went through the process of gentrification, where all of the white citizens moved out and left the Black people with lowered, lowered values on their properties and homes. And that created this atmosphere where the redlining changed here, the gerrymandering changed here. My house has been reclassified as far as like zip code and city goes about 3 times since I was born, and I'm only 17. I've gone from being College Park to Atlanta to College Park again to Atlanta again, to a point where I don't even know what to put on my Amazon packages when I'm trying to order things, because like, what city do I live in at this point, And so after they do all this gerrymandering and redlining and deciding where lower income people are, where Black people are, that's when they decide to put gas stations in those areas. That's when the Quick Trip on the corner of my street got bigger. They expanded, renovated, bought a couple of houses on the end of the block, and really took over. And then the neighborhood started getting trashier and litter started appearing. And also, when we talk about food apartheid, it's not just what people can afford. Because a lot of times people only have access transportation-wise and capacity-wise to reach the Walmarts and the McDonald's and the Checkers down the street. A lot of people have to walk in these areas. And the people who do have resources, they don't have anything inside of their community for them to reach. So they have to go and support other communities and put money into other communities, thus widening that disparity. So it makes rich communities richer and it makes poor communities poorer, because we're not putting any money into our own communities because there's no resources here for us. But yeah, that's that on this slide. I think I have one more. Yes. And so our second environmental indicator is air quality. I remember in the video, she spoke about in Michigan how a lot of the youth had asthma. Well, guess what? We have the same problem in Georgia. Me, along with all the rest of my peers in my grade, have been told that we have asthma at one point. The doctor told me I had mild asthma as a baby. And I don't think I know too many people who don't have some kind of bouts of asthma, to a point where it has to be regularly integrated into sports and things like that at a disproportionate rate. And so in Georgia specifically, in 2018, 12.3% of children had been told at some point in their lives that they had asthma. 2,309 children were hospitalized for asthma-related issues. And the overall asthma prevalence among adult Georgians was 8.9%. So that means about 1/10 of the Georgia population has bouts and dealings with asthma. And you can see by the graphics that there is a disparity between Black and white people when it comes to asthma, an overwhelming disparity. Black people are detailed in orange, and white people are detailed in blue. And you see, really, asthma, these rates are basically indicative of just Black people. You can basically say 12.3% of Black children had been told at some point in their life that they had asthma, because the difference between cases is so different, and the rate of hospitalization is so different as well. And by gender, women are disproportionately affected by this, in all races. So on the last note of that, also, poor people are disproportionately affected by this as well. As you see, there is a nice little linear downward scale we have going on the bottom right, where it says Figure 4 asthma prevalence by annual household income, Georgia. So people who make less than $15,000 a year have a 15.3% prevalence, whereas people who make more than $75,000 a year have a 6.4% prevalence. So asthma disproportionately affects young people, Black people, female people, and poor people. So you get hit from 4 different directions when it comes to this. And it's so normalized here that people don't realize how big of a health issue it really is, because just everyone has asthma, not to mention the prices of albuterol and the cost of hospitalization if you do have an attack. I don't think a lot of people know how scary it is to witness somebody having an asthma attack, but I've had to do it like many times because so many people have asthma. And, you know, especially with kids are really active. So it's a real problem. But that's all for my section. I can pass it to, oh, no. There's another slide. And then I'll get to the chat. I'll get to the chat also. Okay. So the prevalence of this poor air quality is most prevalent in West Central, Fulton, East Central, and Clayton County. So Clayton County is actually where I live, and all these areas are actually in Metro Atlanta, with rates ranging from 13.9% to 11.2%. So Clayton County has the 4th worst air quality, and I harp on Clayton County and Fulton County specifically because they're direct, they're basically Atlanta. Georgia has some really weird gerrymandering going on. So I live in Clayton County, College Park, but I live in Atlanta at the same time. It's odd. And so these same places had the most hospitalizations per 100,000 people as well. We as a city have an F for ozone pollution, and we've had an F for ozone pollution since, I believe, 1996. So our air has been terrible for literally generations, like terrible, F. And it's only getting worse. And we have to think about all that we have in the Atlanta and greater Atlanta area. The interstate, the heavy traffic, we have the busiest airport in the world. Think about how that affects our air and our lungs, and think about how little it has done to serve these communities positively. My school is actually the closest school in proximity to Hartsfield-Jackson International. We are the worst, most underfunded, crackiest, lack of resources school in Clayton County, and actually probably Clayton and Fulton County. The airport, they give money to Fulton. They don't give any of us nearly as much as they should be giving us for housing this airport and housing the resources for people after they come out of this airport. Especially considering my neighborhood personally has been dug into for the purposes of expanding this airport. And I know a lot of communities on the other end of this have experienced the same thing. There's no reason for our families to be hearing airplanes taking off and landing every night and dealing with the traffic that comes from people leaving this airport and not have the money that this airport is making as the busiest in the world. And all of these stats come from the Georgia Department of Public Health. They have entire PDF spreadsheets of all this information to a much more detailed level if anybody's interested in looking at that. And people in the chat are saying, I noticed a lack of city-maintained trash cans, and people, yes. A lot of people put trash in other people's trash cans and their neighbors' trash cans, trying to get the trash off the road. You walk by somebody's house, about 10 trash bags on the street. All of these play into the terrible issues that we have with lack of resources. Oh, and we know that asthma affects COVID outcomes. Yes. That is such a huge thing because a lot of people, COVID is mainly affecting people with pre-existing conditions. And as it is a respiratory infection disease, that does not mix well with asthma whatsoever. If you have already weakened lungs from asthma, COVID could be the thing to take you out. Do I have charts for the ozone pollutions? I'm sure if you went on the Georgia Department of Public Health, you would be able to find those because they have all of that information on that site and very digestible PDFs. So I'm going to pass it because I've been talking for a very long time. So I'm out.
Thank you, Rachel. That was all amazing context. I'm going to hand it over to Anna.
Sorry, I was just muted there. Hey everyone, so I just wanted to highlight briefly some of the data sources that we used in this presentation and some places that you can look to for more data and different ways to visually represent some of the inequities that we've been talking about throughout this presentation. So in the Just Growth team where I work, we often draw from census data and have recently started using a tool called My Sidewalk, which allows you to easily represent spatial census data and other environmental and social indicators. Neighborhood Nexus is another Georgia-specific data hub that allows you to create your own maps with different layers of census data as well, so it can be specific to the needs of your work. Some of the data that Blythe used, for example, came from GreenLink and the American Council on Energy Efficient Economy, which are sources that have a lot more information or specifically like energy and environmental data. And PSE has also created its own data source, which was launched in 2013, called the Metro Atlanta Equity Atlas. I think that this atlas brings us to some really important considerations when it comes to thinking about empirical data. So while data is a really critical part of telling stories of inequity, it cannot stand alone. It's really important that this empirical data is tied to people's lived experiences and realities, so that this data is connected to people's stories, things that they are sharing and eyes. So I think also another important consideration when it comes to thinking about data is the data you're choosing to include and not to include. When you're making maps, for example, what you're including and not including is always, you're always making a decision of what to include and what not to include, and that's often a political decision. And so the process of choosing what data to look at and how to collect it isn't operating in a vacuum. And so in the case of the Metro Atlanta Equity Atlas, for example, the commitment to values-based organizing means that the decision of what data, what indicators to look at comes from community conversations and comes from community direction of what data we're choosing to look at and choosing to represent. So yeah, just highlighting that data collection and representation, it should be aligned with your values and means that those decisions of what to show have to be made in collaboration with community. And also once the data has been collected and designed, that it is also accessible to community members and readable by community members. So I'll pass it back to Blake there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So we talked about a lot of different information. We thank you for staying with us this whole time. This is an incredibly ripe topic. So I want to kind of bring us back to centering that history is now. We like to always kind of displace our actions with the call to action of the future, but really kind of really take stock of the moment we're in and actually use all the things we talked about, the ability to talk to government, the ability to engage community authentically, meet them where they are, use the values-based organizing approach. We need to do that now. We cannot, there's no time to wait. So also let's just change this approach and let's use intentional love. I personally love talking about bell hooks and other feminist love theologians to inform our organizing efforts. I think it's really important to also bring up Black female figures when discussing and pointing to for different quotes and different just sayings that kind of like help us with the organizing work and inform what we do. James Baldwin's another figure we use a lot and quote a lot, and very easy to do so. These are two brilliant people. So I just want to kind of leave people with this as hopefully a kind of inspiring moment, because a lot of information can feel very depressing. It can feel very bogged down, but there is hope, and there is hope for a future and ways of doing so. So leave you with these quotes. And finally, we are at the end. We have a lot of different calls to action. I definitely encourage you to take a screenshot of this if you can on your computer. There's a lot of different ways to follow up with us in our work, and we actually have the PSC links at a final slide. But I wanted to quickly point out that we actually have a new clean energy advisory board that PSC has helped implement actually in the Just Energy team in partnership with the city of Atlanta. So you can actually listen in on these meetings. The board member is already set, but you can listen in, and it's a diverse array of stakeholders, mostly including grassroots organizing and the partners we work with right now. So this is a really exciting and the culmination of many years of network building, relationship building, all the things we talked about. And again, also look for our virtual chat and choose, the way of holding virtual community forums. You can look at our social media and website for those information. Follow We the Plug, though. That's our main organizing arm of the Just Energy Circle. They hold listening tours and are holding one right now. So follow them on Instagram for those updates. The West Atlanta Watershed Alliance holds trainings, and they're a very key partner of ours as well. And also support the youth still. We have actually a KTSC ambassador, Jordan Tyndall, who's holding her own environmental justice survey. Here's her email right here to follow up if you want to be involved. And as Anna mentioned too, GreenLink Analytics is also a partner of ours, and we recently were able to use their GEM tool. So we're very excited about this. There's a wealth of information out there helping us to really just explain the intersectionality of this and all the things we discussed today. So I'll definitely open up to anyone else who wants to add anything else to this, but we hope you follow up with us. And thank you so much for coming today, and we hope that we will see you again, and honored to be here.
Thank you, Blythe, and the team from PSC and Youth Ambassadors. Y'all were awesome, and we learned, I think, so much. You gave us so much to think about, and so many spaces to learn and to do some research and get engaged, which is exactly what this is supposed to be about. So we just really appreciate this beautiful time with you, and the ability to really think about environmental racism and the ways that it impacts us kind of in every level of our lives, how it's generational and how we have an opportunity to intervene, how we have an opportunity to make change in our communities and right now, today. So thank you so much. I am looking to see, I believe there is one question in the Q&A from Tigger that says, what does the role of renting play in the energy burden that was discussed earlier? Do y'all have information on that?
That's a really good question. It's really what we found too in working with community is really who the makeup of the landlord is, and there are different landlords that have. There's a lot of histories of Atlanta of racist landlord practices and things, but I definitely want to give more information, so I'd love to follow up on that point. But again, it's you don't really have agency when you're renting to really change what kind of energy you have. It's really like you're walking into the space and using whatever energy, the landlord already has. So, I mean, there's not a lot of agency there. So I imagine that, the stats are definitely not in the favor of low-income Black folks that rely on public housing and, not the lack of updates therein. A lot of times blatantly these housing complexes are left out of updating, retrofitting until the last possible moment or until there's some oversight. But in most cases, they're kind of left to, fend for themselves and, do have their own fans or whatever else makes sense. So, and, heating is a huge issue, especially in the summer and with, temperatures rising. So we see a lot of burden, especially in the summertime. But I'll open up if anyone else wants.
I can contribute to this. As somebody who lives in a neighborhood where the people who own the homes moved out and then they began renting them, I think at least half of the properties in my neighborhood specifically are rented properties. Same thing with apartments and such. Even if the landlords and landowners are people of color themselves, right? It disproportionately affects other people of color who are renting. For one, because it sets them up for their credit to suffer. It sets up the redlining so that people can say, oh, there's not enough home ownership in comparison to people who are living in these homes. And so the property value drives down, but the prices drive up. And in that way, people are targeted with unfair living costs. And then whenever people's credit is negatively affected, they can't afford to pay a lower mortgage, but they can afford to pay high rent. And that's a way that racism when it comes to credit comes in as well. But also when people rent, they tend to not have the same pride in the neighborhood or the land or the community as people who own. So that also contributes to people littering in neighborhoods. It contributes to people trashing the properties. It contributes to people having loud parties on the properties. And it drives people with resources away. And it drives more people who live that kind of lifestyle into the neighborhoods as well. And it's like a negative feedback loop, or that would be, a negative feedback loop in a way. We like to push ownership in the Black community especially, because ownership, I think, is the key to a lot of that liberation in not just a personal sense, but a generational sense as well.
Exactly. I definitely reiterate all those points. And it's just so hard because we're already starting from a place of lack and not having the abundance of wealth that obviously we discussed in the practices of energy burden, paying higher energy bills, being displaced to lower income areas, not being able to retrofit your home. So all these compounded issues definitely play right into what Rachel was already saying.
Thank y'all. And we've got one more question. It says, what are your thoughts around including indicators around weight when we know that weight measures are grounded in racism and sexism and idealizing the white thin body? And the question asker says that she asked this because she loves the inclusion of information about health-related concerns that are higher in communities of color, and was wondering how we can interrogate some of our biases around weight and fatness, much like we do around ability and ableism.
Yes, so that information was included in specifically relations to heart disease and asthma specifically. Because we know that higher rates of obesity can negatively impact these health indicators as well and make people more susceptible or likely to them. It also ties into the lack of healthy food that we have, not from an aesthetic point of view, but from these are the possible indicators that can come with this, and all of these things are linked together in some kind of way. But I do definitely agree that what is considered obese in certain areas is completely healthy and normal in other areas. Especially like the Black community has completely different standards of weight than the white community does. And in places outside of America and outside of the Western world as well, weight is really, and obesity is really a subjective thing at the end of the day. And being obese does not necessarily mean that you are unhealthy, and being skinny doesn't mean that you're healthy either. So I do agree that a lot of these facts and stats could be misconstrued or blown out of proportion in many aspects due to that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point too, because I think we're also learning. This could be a whole other presentation as well. This is like such a ripe issue, the intersection of health and race. But we're also seeing, and I know for myself too, that like the BMI charts that have been put out the last even like 20 years are totally, distorted and not right at all. So that's definitely a whole other issue, and we need to understand that, because weight is we're still learning more about weight, and it doesn't mean like obese and what has historically been considered obese does not mean anything, but it's an important measure sometimes when talking again about Rachel's indicators, that there are certain, connections there, but we're still learning so much more about health indicators. And it's really important to engage in that conversation.
I also
Yeah,
want to say a
absolutely.
big thing is,
Sorry, go ahead, Jabari.
yeah, I just want to say a big thing of it is education. I feel like more people need to be educated of how the BMI was created, how it is racist, um, how people carry weight differently. So some people may be perceived as obese, and some people may be perceived as not obese. Just because you eat a certain way, like, doesn't mean you're healthy. Because I have the metabolism on all the way over there. So I can eat whatever and I'll still weigh 130 pounds soaking wet. So that doesn't mean I'm specifically healthy. It just means I have a high metabolism. So it's just the education aspect that I feel like people are really missing. And also talking about food deserts. I live in a food desert. We got Subway and McDonald's and Burger King over here, and you know where your zip code is, how nice the food line is gonna be. So we don't got the real tricked out food line with the good fruits and vegetables. So if I gotta feed my family, I'm gonna slide to McDonald's. I'm not gonna sit here and have to take the extra time if I'm working 8+ hours a day to make this super healthy meal when I literally don't have the mental capacity or the energy to do so. So it's things like that where we need the information aspect, where you're trying to call poor people lazy when they're probably working harder than you. So it's things like that that I feel like needs to be more widespread, and kind of get these communities the ability to get access to these fresh foods and actually educate them on how to like eat better. Like, people know what they should eat is what they have access to at the end of the day. So
I think it's important also to add too that, healthy is different for everyone too. So some people may feel better, eating meat and having their regular burger. That might be exactly what they need. But we know statistically that eating more greens and those kind of foods are healthful for you. But obviously everyone is entitled to their own diet and their own, what ideal weight is. Everyone, that's an individual question. So I think it's just important just to add that in.
Yes, absolutely. I think this really speaks to all of the different ways that our identities are intersecting, and the ways and the oppressions that we experience compound often and make things like health measures and health outcomes much more complicated than just our BMI, right? And understanding the context of the history of the BMI, and also I think Jabari and Rachel and Blythe, thinking about food deserts and thinking about class and who has access and time to prepare healthy foods. I know whether my food line is going to be good because of the zip code I live in is a very accurate kind of measure often, right? Like, what types of fruits and vegetables are going to be available? Am I going to have access to, fresh fruits and vegetables, period? Or, is my closest food point, the most accessible food point, a place that doesn't even carry produce, right? And so I think those are some really important and valuable insights that y'all have provided. And I think that we often are reductionist in the ways that we think about health outcomes, especially for BIPOC folks and And so as we think about the intersection of that with environmental racism and how it really touches every point of our lives, I think that's a really good thing to think about and to carry forward as we close out today. Just this was great. Thank y'all so much. I don't think we have any more Q&A, and I think we're at time, maybe a little bit over. And I just really appreciate y'all and the time you've given and the thought you've given. And we're just so excited that we were able to partner with you and to learn with you today.
Yeah.
With that, we'll close it out. But this was recorded, and so we will share it on our context website for folks who would like to access it. I will drop that in the chat one more time just so folks can see it. And there's also additional resources there about environmental racism to learn from as well. And we'll also, I think we'll probably try to include that resources slide that y'all shared and for action as well, because I think those are such good tangible steps that folks can take to get engaged and get involved and to learn more.
I'll definitely feel free to share that and share widely. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you so much, Blythe, and thank you all so much for all of your work and for really helping us to learn today.
Thank you so
Can I
much.
say one last thing before we go?
Yeah, absolutely, Jabari.
Yes for Equity launched at 1 p.m. Please visit the partnership for equity.com and go on for the Yes for Equity tab to sign up, and we hope to see y'all there as well. So thank you.
Yes.